far did it go? Yeah. John? Good.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. Would everybody rise for the pledge of allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's City Council Committee of the Whole, December 8th, 2025. May I have a roll call vote? City Clerk Price.
Yes, Councilperson Beckman.
Here.
Bruns. Flynn.
Here.
Morrissey.
Here.
Palladino.
Here.
Soha.
Present.
Stuchel.
Here.
Wolfram. Mayor Sessions.
Here.
We have seven present, Mayor.
Okay, I did hear from Councilman Bruns, and he will be a little late tonight, okay? We'll go into the special presentation, road funding presentation, City Manager Mackey.
Thank you, Mayor.
We don't need to approve an agenda or anything.
No.
Just the committee meetings.
You press the down
Oh,
arrow.
I just wonder.
The down
is
arrow will
this-
click through.
Am I blocking you, Penny, or?
Nope,
anyone in the
you're good.
audience?
For me, you're good.
I'm good.
Thank you for asking.
Councilman Palladino, I'm gonna be down here for the presentation. I mean, if you wanna take my seat, that might be easier.
Gary's not coming, so Jake can take that seat.
I don't know about Gary. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate council setting up this meeting as a whole and for the public who's attending. The idea here is to educate everyone and provide them with accurate information on the road funding situation and condition of our roads. This is kind of a collaboration of all the city staff, the engineer Rob, Jason, the DPS director, Sam, economic development and assistant city manager, Kim, the assessor, and Karen, who is online and available to us, the finance director. But the goal of tonight's presentation is to provide an overview of the City of Hillsdale street network and its current condition, explain how local street funding works and why existing revenues are insufficient on their own, define the scale of the infrastructure challenge and the tools available to address it, and outline the long-term strategy needed to sustain progress over the coming decades. So we are taking a deep dive into this. It's not on one specific topic, but we will cover all topics or most all of them through this process. And this is kind of a basic slide, but just to mention the importance of well-maintained streets. One, safe for mobility for residents and emergency responders, reliable access to neighborhoods and destinations, support for local businesses and economic activity in the community, protection for property values. With good streets, we have seen, and it's been proven that it does affect your value of your property in a positive way, and the overall quality of life and community livability. Also, it's important to mention that a reliable network is not just a one-time project, it's a long-term shared investment in safety, mobility, and economic vitality. With that, I will ask Jason to come up, and we will be kind of moving through slides and taking different parts of the presentation. So with that, I will have Jason. Thank you. Sit down.
All right, thank you. Just a brief street network overview. The city of Hillsdale has approximately 44 center miles of road. Our vast majority of our streets are asphalt with 95.8%, followed by seal coat, chip seal at 3.7, and just a 0.5% gravel. Street system classification. In our network, we have major streets, local streets, and MDOT trunk line. The major streets, we have 20 miles, centerline miles of road. Local streets, 24 miles of road, and 3 miles of MDOT trunk line that we do maintain for MDOT. Major streets are classified as primary connecting routes that move traffic between neighborhoods, business districts, and regional roadways. Local streets, neighborhood access roads that function as the driveway to your home, carry low speed, low traffic. Trunk line, the major street transportation arterials owned by MDOT that carry regional and through traffic across the city. Over to the right there in the map, that is our current network of major local streets and the trunk line. With that, I'll go to Rob, the city engineer.
Okay, so with that 44 miles of roadway, and we then take a look at each road and try to get a what's called a PACE rating, pavement surface evaluation and rating. There's different criteria for asphalt, concrete, and gravel roadways. The one thing with gravel roadways, and we do have a very small amount of gravel roadway, is while concrete and pavement is on a scale of 1 to 10, gravel is on a scale of 1 to 5. And when you look at those ratings, 5 is a non-structural, lowest rating you can get non-structural failures. 4 and below, you assume that you have a structural failure. It could be a crack in a wheel path, it could be alligator cracking associated with puddles, breaking up the asphalt. So myself and Jason have both been through PACER training at one time or another. This last review was done by Jason. So we go through and we rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 in accordance with these documents. When we go through and we do this, a 10 is basically a brand new road. A 9 is basically a 1 or a 2-year-old road. An 8, now you're getting into 3 to 5-year-old roads. 8, 9, and 10, about all you're really gonna do is maybe a crack seal. You know, as the pavement ages, the way the cracks form, you're really not gonna have much in the way of secondary cracking or failures with a 8, 9, and 10. Once you start getting to a 7 and a 6, you're starting to see maybe cracking 100 to 40 foot to 100 foot spacings. You might start to see secondary cracking. So you can still do a crack seal with that, but because you're starting to get more cracking, it might make more sense to go to a seal coat of some sort, whether it's a slurry seal, a chip and seal, micro seal. As that continues down to a 5, you're starting to see quite a bit of cracking. You're getting 4 to 10 foot cracks. You're getting block cracking in some spots. You're starting to see a little bit more, but you haven't broke through the asphalt. You're not seeing potholes yet. It's not getting all broke up. So once you get to a 5, if you can mill and overlay a 5, you can get 10 to 15 years worth of design life out of that. And you're gonna see that it's gonna be about half the cost as we get further down into it than if you let it go to a 4 and you really need to remove the whole asphalt surface in its entirety. 4 to 1 is considered a structural failure. 4, you might still see if you've got a really good base. You might have okay ride quality, When you get down to a 1, you're gonna have cold patch all over the place, you're gonna have potholes all over the place, the ride quality is not gonna be fun. So that's what the scale is, and then, you know, just some real basic pictures, you know, on the good, you know, you're really seeing only one crack and it has crack filler. A fair road, you're starting to see a little bit more cracking in spots. You might have a group of spots where it's cracked, say like in the lower right-hand part of that picture. That might be a spot where there's a little bit of surface water puddling and that spot breaks down over it. The pour, you can see that same kind of spot. Now you're seeing, it looks like, at least from here, crack sealing there, unless it's a shadow from the tree. But that's what we're going through. We're rating all the streets on, so you're gonna see pacer rating in here a lot as we talk about it, and how the costs vary based on what that pacer rating scale is. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
All right, this last year, city staff evaluated all 44 miles of our city streets using the road soft and pacer ratings. The average 2025 pacer ratings for year 2025 is 4.752. That's just average pacer rating calculated by weighting the mileage with the pacer. This actually places Hillsdale overall in the street system at the low to end fare scale. As Rob had talked about, the 5 is the end of the fare scale. We get to 4, that's poor. However, when conditions are broken down by mileage, a significant portion of the system remains in poor condition. 2025 pacer distribution by mile. Total centerline mileage by pacer scale. As we see on this slide here to the right on the map there, the pie chart, we have 10 to 8 in the good category, we have 10.88 miles. 7 to 5 in the fair category, we have 7.53. And in the 4 through 1, the poor, we have 25.28. Again, over to the red in the pie chart, it takes up a vast amount of our city streets. Almost 6% of Hillsdale streets are rated poor condition. This is the most expensive stage due to these streets needing resurfacing and or reconstruction. Change from 2020 to 2025. The reason we chose 2020, that was the year we started of the pacer rating on the full system of the major and local streets. Per the state, we only are required to do 50% of the major streets every other year. But we go above and beyond that and rate all of our street system. With the 2025 APR, 4.752 is a significant increase from the 2020 APR of 3.579, which was all poor. The difference is mainly attributed to the almost 5.5 centerline miles decrease in roads rated from 4 to 1, which would be from the Linwood project, the Westwood project, St. Joe, and so forth. This is mostly due to resurfacing reconstruction project played by the City of Hillsdale between 20 and 25. All the non-grant funded projects completed in this time frame utilize special assessments to stretch road funding dollars further, making it possible to achieve this improvement. This is a map of 2020 of our street conditions. Notice there's not a lot of green on there, but the green we do have on here is primarily, before 2020, we did what we call the low-hanging fruit. We did a lot of chip seal projects that year. Bacon, East Bacon, West Bacon, Bernard, Griswold. That was a lot what we call it, again, low-hanging fruit. The return was pretty decent on minimal cost for surface maintenance. We're going to go to 2025. A lot of those greens fell to the yellow, but we're still in the fair category, but there's a lot more green on here for reconstructs. The Westwood project, Uran Street's on there. We're still have good up in the Lombard, Hillcrest subdivision and so forth. With that, I will give it back to Rob.
I guess one little quick note on that 4.72 for the scholars in the room. That's a weighted average. So you're taking your miles of the 10 times the 10, your miles of the 4 times. And what you end up seeing there is you have you know, your tens are gonna skew that number high, and your pours are more of a rating of a 4 than they are a rating of a 1. So that's how you can, get what feels like a high number when you look at that pie chart and have such a large percentage of poor roads. Anyway. So, one of the things we did, as part of the capital improvement plan process, we take the road soft inventory and put it into a spreadsheet. We get the lengths of all the roads, the widths of all the roads. We take that pacer rating and basically we say if it's an 8 to 10, we're gonna do some sort of a crack seal. So a 10, we're not gonna do anything to. A 9, we might consider a crack seal. An 8, we'll consider a crack seal. And then we get to the 7, now we're looking at maybe a slurry seal, which is, the idea behind the slurry seal is it is supposed to help fill in the fine cracks, but it also helps rejuvenate the bitumen, so it does a better job with your temperature shrinkage adjustments. And then 6, we basically did a chip seal to get to those numbers. And then to the 5 is basically a partial cold mill and just a surface overlay. So if you have a curb and gutter street, you go along the curb and gutter, you mill down 1.5 inches, and then when you re-top the road, you put 1.5 inches over the top. So you're not taking all of that asphalt out because a 5, you still should have fairly decent ride quality. You don't have any subgrade failures, you don't have any shear cracks or any alligator cracking in the surface. So you can go in there and just go over the top. And the reason why that number is such a wide scale is we have some roads in town that are 20 feet or less as far as street widths go, and they don't have curb and gutter and they don't have sidewalks. And then we have some roads, let's say in the downtown area, where you've got 40 to 50 feet of street widths because of the parking, the drive lanes, and everything. And they have sidewalks and they have curb and gutter. And those features obviously are gonna drive up the cost a lot more than if you don't have any curb and gutter or any sidewalk included in it. So what we did was that inventory, we took a spreadsheet and we said, all right, if this is rated a 5, I gotta do my structure adjustments, I got a cold mill along the edge of pavement, if the road has good sidewalks, maybe we're gonna do 5% of the sidewalks. If the road has fair sidewalks, we're gonna do 25%. If the road has poor sidewalks, we're gonna say 75% of the sidewalks are gonna be taken out. And we look at it from that type of criteria because to go through and do an individualized evaluation of each street for 44 miles, you know, you're gonna be 2-3 months going through all that. So we go through quick, we set some criteria, we sort it out that way to get the costs that go into that range. And there is a spreadsheet that goes with that you can go through, Mr. Mackey, if you want to see it. The pour then, really they're all kind of basically the same thing because there's structure failure. We want to get that old asphalt completely out of there. We want to get it right down to the aggregate base. Or possibly pulverize if there's no curb and gutter and a few number of driveways. Pulverize the existing asphalt, mix it in, leave it there, and then put new asphalt over the top. Both 5 and 4 through 1 does look at curb and gutter replacement and sidewalk replacement. And if you have curb and gutter and sidewalk in a big enough area, you're bound to get driveways. So it makes assumptions on driveways to be removed and replaced. And that's how those costs are generated and how the range are generated. We're not trying to get into storm sewer, we're not trying to get into sanitary sewer or water main. All of those items can significantly drive up costs. So that's how that sheet was generated. Why is street reconstruction so expensive? Most projects involve more than just removal of the asphalt replacement. So example, if you took the 2022 Morey, Linwood, and Howell project, and you looked at it strictly from the asphalt, your project would have been 67% less cost than what it was. Those extra costs were from the ADA ramps going in, any bad sidewalk, any bad curb and gutter. I do think that there was some drainage work associated with that one. So you can see real quick how those prices can jump significantly when you look at more than just the asphalt surface. Since most projects have those, items, curb and gutter, sidewalks, storm sewers. We expect that cost to be somewhere in the $3.5 million per mile range, and that's looking at the cost estimates that came in from, I believe, Rowe on several of the upcoming projects. We're gonna go through those projects and see if we can fine tune those and bring the numbers down a little bit, but that's come right off of the estimates for South Street, Oak Street is where those were coming from. So going back to that big spreadsheet and making those assumptions, you know, if it's good curb and gutter, good sidewalk, 5% will be replaced because we'll probably have at least one bad spot, or we gotta get a handicap ramp in there, so we gotta take out a little bit of curb to get the opening in it. 5% of sidewalk, you know, basically looking at it is we gotta upgrade our ADA, so we're gonna put in handicap ramps. All the way down to a poor street where we're assuming 75% of that sidewalk or 75% of that curb and gutter may need to come out and get replaced. But as a part of that inventory, each street had a rating for left curb, left sidewalk, right sidewalk, and the street widths and the lengths of road. So it's not just a blanket number per mile. It actually looks at each street, what is on that street, what is the condition for that street, and that was then used to get an estimate for budgetary purposes to put into this. Now, when you choose a project, we'll go in and we'll fine tune that estimate. We'll break it down by how much curb and gutter do we actually have to replace, not a generic assumption. So when you get to choosing a project, you're probably gonna see a little bit of variation in numbers as we go through this. The numbers in the spreadsheet are a little bit more conservative. You know, you don't just take the unit price from the last project and compare it to MDOT's unit prices and just use that and put a little padding in it. So the idea is that hopefully these numbers are conservative, but they are based on a methodology to come up with. With that, right now, to get the 1 through 4 up to where you want them to be, 9s and 10s, is $38.5 million. It's a pretty hefty number for the amount of revenues that we have at the current time. And with this, I'm going to turn this over to Sam.
Thank you, Rob. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how street reconstruction is currently funded in the city of Hillsdale. So we use a combination of different revenue sources, local, state, and federal, because our limited local revenues alone are insufficient to accomplish the task. When it comes to local revenue, our millage money, there are two sources there. We have the street maintenance levy, which is set by charter at 2.5 mils, which has been rolled back some due to the Headley Amendment. I'll have Kim come up here in a second and explain the rollbacks there. You can see what that nets the city, as well as the 2021 voter-approved street and leaf collection millage. So it started out at 3.5 mils for streets and 0.5 mil for leaf collection. Now it's been rolled back to 3.33 mils due to the Headley Amendment. Kim, would you mind giving a brief explanation for everyone, a recap of what that amendment did, and then what the rollback has done?
Certainly. So what the Headley does, it was adopted in 1978. It was a constitutional amendment that was adopted by the voters in the state of Michigan. Headley prevents local units of government from collecting more in property taxes than the rate of inflation increase for each year. So even if our property values are increasing by 20%, we're limited to we can only gain revenues of the rate of inflation. So, and that's a permanent rollback. So that once the 2.5 mils was reduced by Headley, it will never go back up to 2.5 mils without a new vote for a new millage. So it just as an example on the street maintenance levy that was set by charter at 2.5 mils. What that did for the voters by reducing that millage rate down to 2.3504 for 2025, that would save A person with a $100,000 taxable value, about $15 a year in taxes. What it does for the city is that we lose $30,000 in revenue because of that rollback.
Thank you, Kim. So in addition to the two millages that we have, which constitute our local revenues for street funding, we also get funds from the state. So Public Act 51 of 1951 created the Michigan Transportation Fund. It is the main source, or one of the main sources for most cities and villages when it comes to funding local street work. So the actual act itself uses a formula to define how much money gets distributed for road maintenance to cities, villages, and counties. So right off the bat, about 20% of the Act 51 funds go to support the various state agencies. The other 80% gets divided between highways, 39.1%, county roads, the same percentage, and then municipal streets only get 21.8% funding under that formula. So under Act 51, major streets are the top municipal investment priority. You'll remember earlier when we talked about the street classification in Hillsdale, we have majors and locals. So the city has to use money in the major street fund primarily for your major streets and for maintenance items related to those streets. The city can only transfer up to 50% of that Act 51 major street funding to use it for a local street project. So as you can see there in 2025, we have the amount of funding received for both our major and local streets through Act 51. I will note about that number under the local street fund. You know, as you can see, Rob talked about the cost for street work. That's insufficient to do a local street project. So even if there is money left over in major streets, and again, we're limited to how much of that we can move down to the local street fund. As far as the other tools that we do use federal funding when it's available, so that comes in the form of grants or appropriations. This is not a recurring revenue source. These are generally one-off things. It's based on project eligibility, and all grants are highly competitive, nor are they guaranteed in any funding cycle or for any project. Most of the grants or appropriations at the federal level are going to be for your major streets. There are very few programs that exist for locals. And then of course, for special financing tools, the city charter does allow for special assessments. So those are public improvement projects that directly benefit the properties in a defined area, which is a special assessment district. And those can be funded either partially or in whole by assessing a charge or a fee against each property that specifically benefits for those improvements. So moving on here, just to talk a little bit more about local property taxes and how this fits in the puzzle here. We do think it's important to note that the total property taxes that residents are paying does not equal the amount of funding that the city has for local roads. In Michigan, local governments are responsible for assessing property and collecting the property taxes for all of the taxing entities. The city of Hillsdale, in this case, we collect taxes on behalf of the state of Michigan, Hillsdale County Intermediate School District, and Hillsdale Community Schools. So the tax bills, the actual bills that get issued to residents, it reflects on there the total number of taxes owed. That's what's owed by the property owner to all of the different taxing entities. And so those funds are then dispersed by the city to those various taxing entities. The important takeaway is that only a very small portion of the total property taxes collected by the city remain with the city to fund local services and infrastructure. For an example of that, we will, if you look at the next slide here, we have this dollar bill graphic, and so this shows your property tax dollars at work. What's really striking is that you can see that for every dollar of property taxes collected in the city of Hillsdale, more than half, 51.5 cents, goes towards education. 13.9 cents goes to Hillsdale County. There is 34.6 cents that goes to the city of Hillsdale for our general operating millage. And then for the street maintenance millages, you only have just under 10%, or just under 10 cents of property taxes collected that actually go specifically to fund local streets, and that's both for maintenance and reconstruction. A few other street funding constraints that we have to deal with in the city of Hillsdale. We have some unique local factors at play. The city of Hillsdale, we are the county seat of Hillsdale County. We do have a number of our largest employers that are tax exempt institutions. This does result in less tax revenue generated from local property taxes. Kim, our assessor, had a report that went to council earlier this year. One of the highlights you may remember from that was nearly 1/3 of the city's total taxable property value is exempt from ad valorem taxes. So that leaves the remaining properties footing the bill and greatly reduces the revenue the city would otherwise be collecting. There are a couple items that are specific to the state of Michigan. Quite simply, we just have fewer tools versus other states. We do not have a local option fuel sales tax that we can use, or a fuel tax. We don't have a local option sales tax either. Vehicles are exempt from property tax in Michigan. Several other states have these tools and are able to use them at the local level to supplement the revenues for road repairs. All right, so now we're gonna talk about what full system replacement would require. So this is the part of the presentation where we actually go through and talk about not only what it would take to reconstruct our system, how much funding that would require, but also we look at our expenses and our expenditures, and we see that there's a funding gap. So just to reiterate, we do have 44 miles, centerline miles of streets in Hillsdale. If the goal is to replace that system every 25 years, because that's the typical design life of an asphalt street, you can do some simple math, divide that by 25, and so we have to do about 1.76 miles per year. For an average reconstruction estimate, again, assuming the goal is that you are going to have to do a reconstruct on these streets, once in every 25 years, we use that number, $2.2 million per mile. Again, as Rob mentioned, with time, inflation will continue to increase the cost of construction. Based on some of the estimates we got back for 2026 projects, that number could be even higher, again, depending on the project you do. So if you do the math and you multiply your reconstruction cost by the number of miles, the city needs to try to target spending around $4 million a year on reconstruction. This is in addition to just maintaining what we currently have. So in the next slide, we show our revenues and expenditures, projected expenditures for this budget year. So that $2.6 million number there, that includes what we get from our local millages and includes what we get in state funding. It does not include grants or appropriations. Again, that's not recurring revenue. If we get it, it's great. It allows us to do more. But this is just how much we have to, let's say, spend or use in a typical year. Now, what you have to remember here is that, again, with the Act 51 monies, there are maintenance things that we have to do, and there's maintenance that has to come first before we can use funds for reconstruction. So the annual maintenance for our street system includes things like street sweeping, caring for the streets during the winter, so the plowing and salting the streets, trimming, removing the unsafe trees that are within the city rights of way and easements, maintaining our drainage structures, our storm sewers, as well as maintaining our traffic signs and signals. The total annual maintenance cost is about $1.7 million. So here's where we get to the funding gap. So what is actually remaining for reconstruction or resurfacing projects in 2026? So if you do revenues minus expenditures, you see that there's less than $1 million, about $900,000 that is actually left available for street resurfacing or reconstruction. Again, as we mentioned earlier, a portion of that $900,000 has to remain in the major street fund, so we can't spend all of that on a local street project. And so kind of the bottom line or the key takeaway is, again, if $2.2 million is the reconstruct cost per mile, and we're trying to reach $4 million a year in terms of our annual replacement target, with only $900,000 available in order to reconstruct and resurface streets in 2026, our current revenues are not sufficient to even complete one full local street project without being supplemented in some way or receiving additional funding support. So again, just to reiterate, the core challenge for the city of Hillsdale is that based solely on our current revenues, we cannot replace our street system every 25 years, which is the typical design life, again, of an asphalt street. This is a structural funding gap, this isn't operational. This is not fiscal mismanagement, it's just simply a result of our revenues not being sufficient to cover actual needed costs. This is also not a problem that's unique to Hillsdale. So cities nationwide are facing the same funding gap as aging infrastructure and rising construction costs are outpacing limited local revenues. So the key question moving forward that we want council to consider is, okay, how do we then go ahead and supplement our current revenues in order to better maintain and rebuild our streets? So now we're going to get into some of the options, right? So these are the tools that you have in our toolkit here locally in order to address this. I'm going to cover the first slide in this section, which is grants. We touched on this briefly before. Grants are cyclic in nature. They're not available every year. Even some of our routine or repeating grant sources like small urban funding can only be obtained every 6 years. We share those funds with a couple other entities in our small urban region. Grants almost always require matching funds, so you typically have to have 20% of the total amount you're requesting or higher. I will say, based on recent grant applications, it generally needs to be much higher if you want to have a chance of getting the funding. Even approaching 50% is not uncommon with some state grants now. All grants, again, they're competitive in nature. The city of Hillsdale, so we already pursue grants at every opportunity, and we will continue to apply for them when they become available. So some of the grants that we apply for in every cycle and have received in the past include our Michigan Department of Transportation, Economic Development Fund, Category F grants, the Community Service Infrastructure Fund, Category B, again, our small urban funding, as well as congressional appropriations. All right, so now we're gonna get into our millage options. I'm gonna ask him to come up and cover this section.
So we already levy property taxes. We have the charter millage of 2.5 mils for street maintenance. We also have the 4 mils that we levied as a voted tax, but half a mil of that goes toward leaf collection, the other 3.5 mils is for street reconstructions. We're limited on the total number of mills that the city can levy at 20. So, excluding the library millage. The libraries are a separate statutory millage, separate from the city mills. If there were no restrictions on the millage rate, the millage request that would need to be approved by the voters in order for us to fully fund the needed revenues would be 10.25 mils. That's a almost 7 mil increase over what we're currently levying. However, we can't legally do that because of the 20 mil cap. In 2025, the most we could have levied in addition to what we're already levying is 1.14 mils when you add up our general operating millage. We have a special voted millage for police and fire equipment. We have a special voted millage for the street reconstruction already. So that leaves 1.14 mils available. That would have increased our funding by $230,000 this year, and it would have affected the average residents by about $62.70 per year, based on an average taxable value of $55,000 for residents. The city would still stay below the 1 mile per year of resurfacing and reconstruction, so that's not adequate to fully fund what we need for a 25-year life cycle on a street. We do have the sinking fund available through our charter as well. This is an existing charter millage that's available for up to 3 mils, but again, limited by the 20 mil cap. So because we already have voted millages in place, we would only have been able to levy 1.14 mils in 2025. It was used for a few years from 2017 to 2021. 2021 is when council put on the ballot for the the specified street millage. The council at that time just felt that was a better option to have a voted millage that was limited to only being able to be used on the streets. Another option is an income tax. There are currently 24 Michigan cities that levy municipal. There are statutory limits on how that money can be assessed. The pros of income taxes are they're paid by anyone who lives or works in the city, so everybody who uses the streets would be paying. It's paid by the employees of the property tax exempt entities. So even though the employer may be property tax exempt, the employees would be paying in to help the city fund these streets. The cons are it requires additional city administration. It's a separate collection process. We would need different software. The treasurer would have to learn how to track and collect those taxes. It requires a separate payment by the taxpayer or the employer. And the city did put an income tax proposal on the ballot in 2012, which was soundly defeated. And I'm going to turn this over to Dave.
Thank you, Kim. The next slide on page 31 talks about, as an option, discretionary general fund allocation. The discretionary allocations for the general fund in 2025 are zero, because typically the general fund revenues and expenditures are usually balanced, leaving little to no surplus to be allocated towards street projects. For example, in 2026, the revenues came in at $5,780,754, with expenditures at $5,779,581. The general fund revenues support the public services expected and desired by the community. Any discretionary allocation would require significant cuts or reduction in areas of the services of both existing programs and potentially personnel to achieve any significant cuts. And it's also important to keep in mind that of the general fund funding, over 50% of that fund actually goes into public safety. So as an important aspect of the community, council and the public have chosen to emphasize public safety, and that accommodates a little over 50% of our annual budget. Additional options, so spending down fund balance. I know that this has been out there and some have thrown it out there, well, the fund balance will solve all these problems, so that's not necessarily correct. So the city's capital improvement fund contains a little over $4 million, almost $4.1 million as of June 30th in our audit. We have planned expenditures of $287,000 thereabouts in 25-26, and this fund provides money for basically large, long-term capital projects. The city has several significant upcoming capital projects that the monies in this fund are expected to cover or to assist in covering. For example, we know, because we've had engineering reports done, that we have 6 failed culverts in the community, which are about $1.5 million each to replace. That's a $9 million potential cost. The DPS building replacement, that is a building that has failed, and we keep it Band-Aid together, and we know that that cost is about $3.5 million. The mill pond behind the mill pond dam, is about a $3 million repair or removal. And this is something the state has been on for a number of years, either through testing, through engineering studies, through additional work to that. We know that this is a expenditure that's coming up. And with all these, we're hoping that we can find grants that will absorb the majority of the cost. And then lastly, we have on here another stormwater issue that we know we have, and that's the Bacon Street and Manning Street intersection drainage improvement problem. We know that's a $2 million problem based on previous engineering estimates. And I know Ms. Swan's here, and she lives through this. When it rains heavily, that whole intersection floods, and people tend to drive through it and see how larger waves they can create. So we have to send staff up immediately upon these type of storm events, after hours, whenever, and it's usually Jason himself to cone off both sides because they're not cognizant of their neighbors and what they're going to do by putting the water into their apartment or other things. So that's a $2 million expenditure we know we have in the future. So as you can see, we have well beyond the $4 million that we have saved up. And it's important to note that, this $4 million, it's taken us years. This is something we've saved through various means and property sales, probably over the last 10 years, because we didn't have this particular account. The money was, some monies were sitting in the general fund, but we specifically earmarked those for capital improvements so council and the public can understand what needs to be addressed. So with that being said, as you can see, once we burn through the $4 million, that's not even half of what we have expenditures for or issues we have to deal with beyond roads. Lastly, from my slide, just wanted to mention, so this is one of the other items that has come up in the last couple years as council decided to allow the college to take over that section of vacating that section of Galloway Drive so they could look at constructing a hotel for the community or for the college that will benefit the entire community. So that being said, what was negotiated was we're expected to receive $2 million in total with a $1.7 million lump sum when the street vacation process is complete. I'm hoping that is this spring. It has taken a while to get through the court process and all the legal hurdles, followed by 3 $100,000 annual payments. The idea behind this was the $1.7 million would go into a fund at the Hillsdale Community Foundation to start collecting interest, and then the $100,000 per year was for 3 years, which would allow that principal to get up to about $2 million, and at that point would kick off with interest, hopefully around $100,000 a year. That's the way this is currently set up to move forward with. So that $100,000 potentially would be going into the road fund as well, because this is for road funding. And next, Sam.
So one new tool that we do have that was recently created is the Neighborhood Road Fund. So this is another state funding tool that the legislature provided, and the idea is to provide additional support for cities and village local streets. The funding is distributed, again, based on a formula and is intended to supplement, not replace, the existing State Act 51 funding. So we would retain a good majority of our Michigan transportation funds, and then this would be a new supplemental source. So we are projected to receive $407,000 through the program beginning with the state's fiscal year 26. The state operates on a fiscal year that starts in October. There are future annual payments through fiscal year 2030 that are expected to be larger and to scale up. This is a meaningful new recurring revenue source for local streets. A few points when it comes to addressing this, even if you take that full amount and you do dedicate it to the roads, it still doesn't get us to that, $3.9 million annual replacement target on its own, but it is still a very good supplement to what we get. The neighborhood road funds, again, we are expected to receive some of that money during the state's fiscal year 26. However, we don't know when that's going to be. We don't know if the payments are going to be monthly or on a different frequency. And in all likelihood, we will not receive the majority of that funding for our upcoming 26 construction season, although it looks like it should be available in the future moving forward. With the neighborhood road funds, because that $407,000 isn't enough to do a local street project, the idea would be you would combine that with our existing local revenues, the millages, the special assessments and grants, and then you would be able to make full projects possible with that. And then I'll have Kim, our assessor, come up one more time here to discuss special assessments, which is another tool that we have been utilizing to supplement our road funding.
So our current policy is to split the cost of a road project 50-50 between the city and the property owners that are directly benefiting from the project. In reality, the average that we have actually assessed is about 30%, and that's because we have caps in place. So any one individual property owner will not be assessed for more than 25% of the value of their property. If it's a residential property, we have by city policy, that 25% cap is by our ordinance. By city policy, currently, we have a lower cap of $5,000 for residential properties, $10,000 for commercial, and $15,000 for industrial. And then those assessments are split up in 10 or 15-year repayment terms, depending on the maximum amount that each property is assessed in a district. So with the caps are adequate at this time to take a resurfacing reconstruction project from being underfunded to having sufficient funds to complete the project. That 50-50 split can be changed by council decision. That's just what our current policy is. Some benefits to using special assessment as a financing tool. While a millage taxes everyone equitably, not everyone receives the benefit of having their road resurfaced or reconstructed. So everybody in the city has been paying into the road millage, but only the streets that we've been able to do projects on, so only less than a dozen streets so far since 2021 have been resurfaced. Special assessments guarantee that the road being resurfaced or reconstructed is the road that the property owner likely drives daily. So the people that are paying the assessment are receiving the benefit directly. If the project doesn't happen, there's no assessment. The assessment also has a definitive end date. Special assessments are the only mechanisms that we have available to receive contributions toward infrastructure projects from the property within the city of Hillsdale that are tax exempt. So even if they don't pay property taxes, they are subject to special assessment. And then I did just do a little bit of looking into the projects that we've done we've done 8 projects since 2021. Our average assessment was $169,000 for each project. Another option that we have to supplement revenue, this would be an additional millage, but it is outside of our 20 mil limit on property taxes. We could create a Public Act 345 fund that to fund our firefighter and police officer pension fund. There are some cities in Michigan that have done this. It would generate about $495,000 that would be freed up from our general fund expenditures that we're currently making it would make those funds available for street funding. And there is we found a white paper online from MSU Extension on that act, if anybody is interested in it. Again, that's Act 345 of 1937. There's also Public Act 33 of 1951 that authorizes the creation of a special assessment district to levy and collect special assessments for funding fire and police services. Under the act, council would annually determine the amount to be assessed for the district. We would determine the costs and expenses of the police and fire motor vehicles, apparatus, equipment, buildings, and police and fire protection. If implemented, these funds, although strictly allocated to the fire and police departments, free up funds now allocated from the general fund. So again, it's an additional millage against taxable value. It does not apply to property tax exempt properties. It's considered a special assessment, but it's levied as a millage.
As you can tell, we didn't just look at the programs that we're currently looking at for revenue. We've kind of kicked the can to see what else was out there that we could look at that might be able to assist in this particular process of reconstructing our roads. But as you can see, no single funding source is sufficient on its own to do this. But put together, these tools allow the city to continue making measurable progress each year. Can we reach the $4 million? No, but the idea behind this is, and I believe in previous councils, they wanted to do as much as they could with the resources they had available at that particular time when we started special assessments a few years back. If the council's desire is to achieve as much road work, again, this council, as possible, as quickly as possible, staff recommends an everything and approach, wherein the city continues to use all its revenue tools. We've got different revenue tools that we're not using, but we would suggest not just strictly eliminating one, but if we're going to replace one, that we look at finding a replacement for it to keep as much revenue into the pot as we can. So eliminating, again, as it says, any one of these tools directly reduces the amount of street work the city can complete. And this is just a pictorial reference to the layering of those. As you can see, our existing revenues in the orange are about 900,000, as is consistent with this presentation. The neighborhood roads funding is about 400,000, and the special assessments is about 300,000 a year. So these are the tools that we typically are using currently to kind of get up to about $1.6 million. Or we will be with the new road funding from the state. Otherwise, we were looking at about $1.1 million. So the layered funding approaches the cost of one full reconstruct project a year. Sustainable progress depends on combining every available funding tool, in our opinion, to at least put together a good faith effort towards this goal. And this is the last slide, so we will take questions from council. Staff is here. Additionally, I don't remember if I mentioned, but Karen, the finance director, is online, and if there's a specific finance question, she'd be happy to answer that remotely. Karen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. With that, on the agenda, we have it open for questions for general council discussion. If you've got questions or about anything specifically in here, Councilman Flynn.
Question for Kim and maybe Karen. The Public Act 345 and the Public Act 33. Could you go into those a little more again? I know you said that if we were to use those acts would free up roughly $1 million or $1.1 million, but do you know how much of an extra millage that would be on the taxpayers of the city?
So it would be based on, the needs for each of those purposes from our budget. And I don't know if we wrote down.
So Councilman Flynn, the 495,000, I believe, it mentioned in the first, so that is specific, and you can only assess what your police and fire pension amount is. So that 495,000 is what we spend on police and fire pensions annually.
Okay.
So that's that particular one, and
The other was some 672,000.
Right. So 495, our taxable value is about 2.3 million. So you would divide that out to figure out how many mills that would be.
Okay. But that would be an extra payment by the taxpayer
Right.
to fund that, so that we can take this money out of that general fund and put it towards roads.
Right,
Okay, so local people would still be paying for it, just in a different way.
yes,
Thank you.
And that doesn't hit the nonprofits?
yes,
And it would have to pass this council and then go on the ballot?
yes. The Act 345 would have to be a ballot question. The special assessment would not, but you would have to hold a public hearing.
I have a question. So, it's probably not a fair question, but I'm asking. So based on population size, gross income, average value, property value of this city, if we pull this trigger, where does that put us overall millage in comparison to other cities our size?
I'm not sure what the millage rates are for other cities outside of Hillsdale. It would definitely put us at the top for Hillsdale County.
Well, I thought it was good.
Yeah.
Or what's this region, basically?
Yeah, Hillsdale County millages are fairly low compared to most other counties. So without doing some more research, I can answer that question for sure.
And I know it's been 13 years, but would you have a rough guesstimate in 2025 numbers that if we did go back and ask about the city income tax and how much money that might generate, or would you have to do all the recalculations again?
Yeah, I would have to calculate that.
Okay.
And it lost, do you remember the numbers? It lost pretty big.
It was solidly defeated. It was before I started here, but
It would be more than 2 to 1.
yeah.
It was like 70% voted against it.
Kim, do you have, or can you prepare the history of the special assessments for the last 10 years, the different neighborhoods and how, you know, all of that, just, yeah. How many of these have we done?
We've done 8 since 2021.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Dave, are we, I hate to use the word guaranteed, because until we have the check in our pocket, nothing's guaranteed. But the $407,000 promised us from the state, a lot of that is coming from the new tax on marijuana, correct?
that is correct, yes.
Because I just read here over the weekend that the marijuana industry, or whatever, is now filing a lawsuit against the state of Michigan to stop that tax from happening, that 24% tax. So there's a chance that that 407,000 may be delayed or may be lowered, or we may never get it, correct? I mean, we can't really count on that money.
Until we see the wire transfer, I'd say, you know, we have a good indication. And I think one thing that if it was mentioned, I didn't catch it, is currently that neighborhood funding is a 4-year process. So at the end of 4 years, it could go away. So
But it can also go away after the next election in 26 too, couldn't it? I mean, so is it feasible, I guess, to plan even for that money, or is that just something that we can just put in the back burner and say, hey, if we get it, great, but we should plan not to get it?
We've been assured that it is coming. Now, at the state level with the state staff, they are working out the details. You know, once it being passed legislatively is one thing, but the details of how it's enacted and how that all pans out has to go through that process. And we have communicated with the staff on that, and they were still working on that as of a few weeks back on how the timing of things and how that would happen. But we're at least confident that that effort's gonna go forward here at the first of the year or so, but it's a question of timing and how it hits, because of the difference in budget years.
Okay, thanks.
Councilman Palladino?
Thank you. So the staff is recommending everything, and are you defining that as adding the sinking fund, the pension millage, the police and fire SAD, the income tax, the general fund allocation, and the capital fund, or some combination of those, or just keeping the current funding mechanisms that we have?
So that's suggesting with the neighborhood road funds, that's basically stating what we currently have in place with the millages and the special assessment and adding the neighborhood road funds. We're saying with the other things that if we take something out, that, you know, we do have options to replace it if we want to go a different route, but we wouldn't take a funding stream out unless we had a revenue to replace it there in order to keep our current pace going.
Okay, so everything and is more of a statement that we should, at minimum, maintain the baseline that we're at?
Correct.
Okay, and we're looking about 300,000 for special assessments out of the 1.6?
Yes.
Okay. And then the 25-year replacement was 3.9 million a year, is that correct?
Yes, to do 1.76 miles a year to get through that.
Okay, was there a calculation of what's a year mark we could actually aim at as a benchmark? It seems, just sort of ballparking it, we're looking at about 40, something like that. Do we have a number that has a little bit more political, you know, policy-making use? Because the 3.9 doesn't really mean anything for our purposes with where we're at now, right?
So you're looking for a more accurate timeline?
Yeah, like what could we actually do? Are we talking 35 years, 40 years?
That is a good question, and I don't know that, we'll see if Rob can satisfy you on that, but, again, it's one of those things that ultimately you're putting forth your best effort, because depending on if we get a grant, or say the neighborhood funding goes away in 4 years, we gotta keep adjusting to move forward with the best we can, weighing, you know, the cost of it to the residents, so.
Right. I guess maybe to put it in more practical terms, what could we do, for example, to not have the worst streets in the state? Like, if we just wanted to be second worst, is there a time frame, a number of years, and then how would that correlate to a dollar amount that would actually be achievable?
So the idea behind the 25-year design life of the asphalt, that's the amount of time it takes to go from 10 to a 1. Okay, so if you can go through and get it cycled through every 25 years, in theory, you got about 30% by mileage that are 8, 9 to 10. You got about, I guess, I'm gonna say 33.3 miles. Okay, so 5 to 7 and 1 to 4. So as you keep that cycle going, that is always kind of taking off your bottom and putting it back on the top and cycling it through in 25 years. Obviously, that's a hard number to hit. There's probably nobody in the state that's gonna hit that right now. It's just the money isn't there. There was a reference on the inflation on the construction costs. In general, since 2002 through 2025, construction inflation is double what the regular inflation is. So we're falling behind every which way on that. As far as getting another number, you know, we're talking about a full project as being a mile, which means you're at a 44-year cycle instead of a 25-year cycle. So you're probably gonna see some more numbers down at the low. The downside with the 44-year cycle is obviously your major streets, you wanna keep them as best as you can keep them. You probably don't want a major street to go below 5. If you can keep them all above 5, which runs into that, well, you did their road twice and you haven't done mine yet, right? And on a 44-year cycle, you're probably gonna have, I've heard the phrase low hanging fruits, your narrow roads that you could probably get a good mileage at a low cost. They don't necessarily have the driveways on them, they don't necessarily have all the residents on them, they're not necessarily high volume roads that everybody's using. If you put that money into that, are you getting your best bang for your buck when you've got other streets that have more people, higher traffic volumes, things like that. So there isn't a good number to just say, all right, do 1 mile a year, do a 44-year cycle, and you're gonna hit every street in that 44 years. You might not hit every street in that 44-year cycle. The 25-year cycle, that's intended to get you through every street in that 25 years. Well, financially, that's very difficult to do. And there's really, I don't know of any communities that are hitting that. You drive any city, their commercial districts look real nice, you start hitting the back roads and things start to fall apart.
Okay, thank you. So really, we want to repair every major street every 25 years, and neighborhoods are gonna have to get once or twice a century.
Well, it might be. Now, obviously, they've been, because I'm just stepping into this, right? They've been very creative in their grant writing. They've gotten grants that, you know, you gotta use the right catchphrase to get the grant, and they're taking full advantage of that. And I think that's great to see, at least from the little town I come through, you know, they're pursuing funding options we didn't really know were available to us. So they're doing an amazing job of getting every penny that they can get out of every person they can get it out of to keep things moving. And you gotta keep doing that. So that'll help. And as we go through this, obviously some roads, you know, Howell Street in the downtown area, it's a very wide street. You're not gonna get as much mileage bang for your buck as what you're gonna get on some of the smaller local streets. So, you know, we can mix and match projects up maybe a little bit too that help get us a little bit more mileage while costs are still somewhat lower, you know what I mean? Because as inflation carries out, it gets more expensive to do those projects. So you do a little mix and match at some of those back streets you might not think of right away, just to get the mileage out there and get them replaced. It's picking individual streets is more than what this meeting here is really intended to be for. So I'm not trying to belittle that or belabor it, but there's no magic number that truly gets you where you're gonna be. You can have one overloaded semi that'll take a 10 to a 4 in a day. You know, so that's why legal road loads are so important, and making sure you're getting, the semi goes on a side street, you're getting permits and you know what that's gonna be. So there's a lot of management tools that is also being done right now to help protect the streets. But those things are all factors that play into it.
Mr. Mayor, can we'll have another chance to speak as council, I suppose, at the end of this meeting. Can we hear from the people who?
Well, I would like to cars done
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
So, now, I wanna ask, now, has the cost increased every year? And is it continuously going up every year? And so, what's that gonna be like?
Yes, so to answer that question, Mr. Mayor, as the city engineer indicated, that typically is, we're seeing go up twice the amount of inflation. So if we're talking 6%, it might be, or 3%, we're talking 6% on construction costs. Inevitably, that's what we've seen in our financial purchasing through the budget, through the BPU, through the city, just the cost of things, materials and different things is pretty much outpaced inflation.
Dave and maybe Rob, several years ago, the city seal coated a number of city streets, chip seal. Is that an option still? Will that help maybe some of those 4 and 5 streets in town to kind of give them a little longer life, or isn't that viable anymore here in the city?
I probably wouldn't necessarily do it on 4 unless there's already. So there's 2 things in the Pacer rating that makes talking about a 4 difficult. One is a sheared crack in the wheel path, which is an overloaded semi went down it and the pavement just literally cut. The other one is utility patches. And in theory, if you have a utility patch, you're not supposed to rate that street above a 4. So you could have a brand new street, Consumers Energy decides to go in year 1 and put a little pothole in it. In theory, you're supposed to take that down to a 4. That street really isn't a 4. But a 5 would be a good candidate. Still, 4 is seal coat, chip seal. So one thing you see with pavements, it's called reflective cracking. So you have aging cracks and you have high traffic volume cracks. The sun itself can break down a street, right? The bitumen becomes brittle, so as it expands and contracts, you get a little crack. Seal coats help rejuvenate the bitumen a little bit, but you know the thing to keep in mind is if you've already got let's say a 1-inch crack, you know a thin layer of bituminum and a couple stones ain't going to change that crack being there, so you're still going to get the movement. So a seal coat is nice, but it's the crack seal is like a 2-year design life. Slurry seal, chip seal is a 5-year design life. 1.5-inch overlay is a 15-year design life. You take all the asphalt out, you make sure your subgrade is good, you expect that to be your 25-year design life. So which is where if you take a road that's a 5 and resurface it, you went from maybe needing to replace it in 25 years, now it jumps out to 35, 40 years. So a seal coat is viable. You want to be careful as to what 4 you pick, right? If you've got a 4 with a cracked wheel path, you know, resurfacing it like that probably would help buy time. If it's a subgrade failure and there's a puddle in the road and it's all alligator crack, and if you ever go out and look at the streets, if you see a rectangular shaped crack, that's block cracking, that's from the sun. And if you see a triangular shaped crack, that's alligator cracking, that's a structural failure either from bad subgrades or water. So actually looking at the cracks will tell you what caused it. If you have a lot of alligator cracking, or if you're seeing subgrade failures, or you're seeing rutting, which is an indication of subgrade failure, putting a chip seal over it probably isn't going to be very effective. But if you have a 6 or a 5, and you want to prolong that an additional, let's say 5 years, because that's the design life of that feature, you can do that. And when you start looking at the cost of resurfacing over a chip seal, it does make sense to do that preventative maintenance, because the dollars for the years gained is a lot more efficient on a 5 or a 6 than it is trying to redo a 1. But you also gotta, you know, have your residents on board and understand, hey, this road didn't get fixed, but you took this nice road and you just redid it. That's always been a trip spot for me, is how you do that. But I've always dealt with communities that have actually worse roads than what you got. So,
Thank you.
Any more council discussion, questions? Okay. Seeing none, I will open up the podium for general public comments. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and please state your name and your address.
Jeff Bazine, 126. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys for doing this detail to you guys. It's great. It's just too bad there's not 5,000 other people here to hear this stuff. I have some questions and a few comments on different things. So first of all, I hear from everyone in council that property values is going to be the most important thing, is going to raise our property values. Well, that's if you're moving and leaving our town. A a lot of us are staying probably the rest of our lives, and hopefully our children and our grandchildren will stay here. So property value means nothing. So when that's mentioned, it's kind of an insult to us people that stay around. For those people that are here for 4 or 5 years, great, you made a few extra dollars. One question I have, again, this is a 40-year, 50-year recycling plan. On a finance aspect, my question is, why don't we look at when the rates are really low, you know, like for example, when we went through the COVID rates, why didn't we look to finance that? Potentially being able to drop that down to a low serviceable price to make some of these numbers more efficient. Again, I saw the grants, I appreciate that information. I actually was thinking it was like a 50-50, but in some cases it looks like it's 20%, which that's great. Again, it helps also with the local roads, seeing those, which ones are actually there, so that's very helpful. How long has the PACER ratings been around? And I know we've been working on this since about 2010. I've noticed that this has been a huge thing for council, but prior to 2010, I want to know what happened to our community. Did we just forget how to do roads? You look at Jonesville and other places, and they don't have this issue as bad as we do, so I'm curious about that. The other question I have is the other mechanicalisms that we use to reduce potholes. Right now we do a cold patch fill. Why aren't we using infrared fill? And also when we do reconstruction, why aren't we using infrared to bond the two together? Maybe that's just, I've been reading different studies on that, and I've been told that that's the way to keep a better bond. Just like old cars too, I know it's a 25-year, but what can we do in preventive maintenance today on a new road to keep them going? One of the things I think Dave has been really big on, prior to him, they didn't do this. We saw Mr. Rose mess up everything on State Street. No infrastructure underneath, no water, sewer, and then when they came through and crushed everything down, it basically, there were 6 or 7 of my neighbors that had Roto-Rooter, had spent 8-10 grand to redo the sewers, and then of course, which was mentioned, the cuts, ruin it and bring it down to a 4. We have a brand new road that had 7 cuts within a year. And that's kind of a waste, I think, but whatever. So I think it's important to do the sewer and water on all the roads, because I know on State Street, my grandparents told me the 80 years that they were there, no one had done anything with them. I've got a lot of other things here too as well. For example, I know we were looking at some of the things on the pensions. Isn't the pension been switched out, so now that's a 401k style product? So over time, that number is going to diminish. And one other last thing is on the general fund, and I'll go from there. We have the 300,000, or excuse me, the 100,000 that the airport's been getting kind of on a continual basis. Our current new manager looks to do away with that. I'm just looking at future funding for that. And then to Bob's point real quickly, in the past, it'd be nice, for example, we have a 20-year road cycle, have a 25-year plan so we can, as citizens, say, okay, in the next 5 years, my road is getting done versus the surprise, Oak Street, next year we're getting it done, I now have to save $5,000. I think if you had a plan, people would be more beneficial and happier about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill Gardner, 157 Oak Street. I also have questions, and I want to also say thank you for the presentation. I know it takes a lot to put into that, and this was very good information. Kim, I loved the part that you specifically mentioned about the taxable portion being on a $55,000 SEV at what, $67.50 or something. $62.70 is what you said would be the average tax increase. I think that would be a lot more easier to swallow than $5,000. The very first slide said long-term shared investment in safety. I would really love to know, were we operating on a 25-year replacement plan previously in this long-term shared investment on safety? And when was the last time that the streets were evaluated using this PACER scale discussed? I've never heard of that before, prior to 2020. Does the city have that data? I'm wondering on that one. If 60% of the streets, as mentioned tonight, are rated poor, why did it take so long to evaluate it and determine how we could be funding these other than stats? Because Hillsdale's median household income is $42,000 annually, significantly below state and national averages. After taxes, that's about $2,800 a month in take-home pay. A $5,000 SAD assessment represents nearly 2 full months of take-home income for the average family. For perspective, our median income is 24% lower than Jackson County, 40% lower than Michigan State median, and 69% lower than Washtenaw County. Yet we're going to be asked to shoulder the same assessment burden as wealthier communities with the SADs. Here's another thing that I found as a really not an okay thing, and maybe you guys can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but the city's going to charge residents 4 to 5% interest on SAD payments while securing municipal bonds at 3 to 4%. So that 1% markup really isn't necessary because it really is profit. And on a $5,000 assessment over 10 years, residents are going to pay $1,200 to $1,500 in interest alone that goes directly to the city coffers. So for me, this necessary infrastructure assessment this is really a revenue generating thing rather than, which would again throw more hardship on residents, which I don't find that fair to families earning $42,000 annually with mortgages, utilities, groceries. An additional $600 a year obligation isn't manageable, and that's making people choose between essential expenses and municipal assessments for services that should be funded through general taxation.
Here you go. Jonathan Michael, 34 West South Street, Ward 3. Wanted to speak a little bit to, I know Councilman Flynn had asked about the Neighborhood Road Fund, specifically detail about the marijuana tax. I'm not here in my professional capacity, but I do work for the state and have a few answers on that. So the marijuana money of the entire Neighborhood Road Fund, it makes up one piece of it. It's about, no joke, $420 million per year. There is a current lawsuit, as you noted. The judge actually today denied the injunction to pause the tax. They're looking at a piece of the Constitution, and I can talk to you a little bit more about it if you have time after or something. But the marijuana money is $420 million roughly. The total remaining money is supposed to grow to about $1.6 million by 2030. So that puts you at about $1 billion total by 2030. That puts you at about $2 billion if you count in the marijuana money, 1.6 if you don't. So the loss, whether or not the lawsuit goes through, that most of the road funding is still going to come through to the city of Hillsdale. The city of Hillsdale share at the beginning of that is $405,000, as Sam noted. That's supposed to grow to $630,000 next fiscal year. And again, those numbers will continue to go up. I don't think MDOT has projections specifically made for that amount, but $630,000 even in fiscal year 2027, that's a lot of money. I mean, I think Mayor Pro Tem Palladino noted if you actually take, since 2021, I know it was said that about eight special assessments have been done since 2021, which is in the last 5 years, and they had averaged 270, I forget exactly what the amount was. It was $100-something thousand, but the average per year is 270. So if you take $630,000 minus 270, that still leaves you with, well over $300,000 a year to spend on road projects. So there's less of a shortfall if you pull out the special assessment piece than what we would gain through the neighborhood road funding. And I think the last thing I wanted to say, and I know Dr. Wolfram isn't here today, one of the things he had brought up a couple of times before has been the increase in property value. I'd really like to agree with what's been said before at the podium, that that's a little frustrating to me. If you look at a lot of, my mom's from Portland. Think about cities on the West Coast and how property values have done there. In some places they're doing really well, but in a place like San Francisco, property values have fallen like 10% in the last year. One of the reasons for that is San Francisco is not very good at actually enforcing the law and providing basic goods and services. And yes, it's true that municipalities that provide basic goods and services, maintain their infrastructure, are going to have higher property values, but that doesn't mean that you should charge people $5,000 in order to make up the difference. Like, if I could make a list of all the things that the city does to enforce its laws that make my home worth what it is. That doesn't mean that you should charge me $5,000 for that. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. David Hamilton, Ward 4. To continue the thought, You've let my property values decrease for a lot of years. It is incumbent on the city to maintain services and safety, and you've not done that for years. When Berry Street last year said, no, we're not going to pay the special assessment district to replace curb and gutter that are already there, just allowed to deteriorate, and road surface that's already there, just allowed to deteriorate, and sewer and water services that are already there, just allowed to deteriorate. You've taken away property value by not doing maintenance. And now the maintenance includes tearing the whole thing up and replacing it. That's still maintenance. It's still under your mandate. And you've exposed us all now to a class action suit for people coming and saying, why have I paid SADs all these years? Well, there's been a case up in the West End for adding value to properties where you're putting in curb and gutter. But if you're replacing what should have been maintained and has been allowed to deteriorate, a SAD is illegal. It's not a valid method of funding. Won't you please consider a bond? I'm bullish on Hillsdale. I think that we're going the right places. If we continue to push marginally and not legal methods to fund our road services, we're putting ourselves out at risk. We can do better. This community can do better. We have all the capability in the world to offer a bond to settle some of these differences and bridge us until the state comes through with the funding that is hanging, and most of which is coming. It's a matter of time. I think bonds are a whole lot better solution than anything that I heard. And again, thank you very much for the presentations. You've put in a lot of time and done good math. But we need to have better solutions. We really do, and we're capable. Let's go, Hillsdale.
Hold it for 4 seconds.
Hello, I'm Tim Bloley from Berry Street. I just wanted to ask kind of a related issue tonight about how to protest SADs. Last year, as Peter noted, Berry Street did a protest. On December 2nd, we submitted a petition for the December 2nd meeting, and it seemed to be held as valid and binding. Mr. Mackey made mention of that in the meeting, that there's no sense going forward given the petition. And I understand the city lawyer in the preceding weeks here stated that that's all you need is a petition some point before the meeting. And my reading, like just literal reading of the city charter, says you need a written objection before the final vote. That's all you require to lodge an official protest. There's binding on council if it goes 7-1, I think, to overcome that. And yet in Berry Street's case, a few months passed. In February then of this year, we were told actually, well, I went to the clerk's office when I saw that it was back on the agenda. And I asked about it, and she said that actually petitions are illegal, or they're not efficacious. You need letters. Couldn't find anywhere vindicated in the code, but okay, following orders, get my letters, turn them in, people turn them in. And we got even more people that time, or different people added the voices in. Get the notice, we're 10 days out from the final vote. So out of an abundance of caution, and I asked one more time if the letters were received. The answer is yes, but they are not binding on council because they came too early. And so apparently they have no power to be heard. And so we had to do it again in about 9 or 8 days. And again, we got some new people on board yet again opposing it. So my question is just who authorized, if the city lawyer said what I believe he said, and if he stated that petitions are binding, if that is the law, and that seems to be what the city charter says, why was Berry Street treated differently? Who authorized that decision to block the first 2 petitions or make it hard for us? And if so, what is the legal reasoning behind doing that? Because it seemed an awful lot to people on the street, myself included, like we were being purposely, creatively obfuscated to prevent us from protesting this tax, which I know it's an assessment, but that's what it actually, that's how if you could also just make clear for people in the future going forward how they ought to protest, that would be really, really great, I think. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Dr. Victor. I live in Ward 3. I'd like to just reiterate some of the great comments that have preceded this, particularly the point about providing basic goods and services. My overall frustration isn't about nitpicking numbers and what's exactly the right way, to cut this. It's the broader point that in my time living here, I haven't heard anyone discuss, except for maybe a couple people on this council, and I haven't heard anything from the city manager, the point that the fact that we've been doing this represents a fundamental failure on the part of the city. We, the council, I, the city manager, haven't done my job. I haven't figured out how to perform the basic function of maintaining the goods and services. Roads, one of the most basic things the city is obligated to do, without imposing a major financial burden, as another woman noted, at basically usurious interest rates on the citizens of the city for something that they're already owed by living here. No one wants to acknowledge that. Instead, it's how, well, actually, of course, we can't cut the budget any other way. Everything else is absolutely necessary, so we have to add this big tax on. And and that's why people are upset. They're not upset about particularly the way that stuff has been done. Should we do bonds? Should we do that? I mean, it's a perfectly fine idea. But the point is, you're obligated. This should be a priority way above the amount of other boondoggles that the city devotes its money to. This should be taken care of. And if you need to find ways to fund something else through special funding mechanisms, that's the way you do it. But instead, normal residents have just been left to suffer. I mean, the street that I lived on before I received the SAD hadn't been redone, I think, 60 years. And people laughed about, Councilman Palladino's point about, residential roads, we can expect to have them done, once or twice a century. That's how things are working. That's what's being done. Okay, that's the actual future. And that's embarrassing. When you put it in those terms, it shows what an absolute failure the council and the city as a whole have been in terms of actually doing what they're supposed to do. Law and order, basic goods and services. So I would just encourage you to, when you're going forward and figuring out how to do this, not only to do it in a way that's the least harmful to the citizens, but also how can we prevent this from ever happening again? How can we prevent a fundamental failure in governance from ever happening again? And hold yourselves responsible for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, CJ Tonfrey, Ward 3. And again, just to reiterate, what you guys pulled together was amazing, and that's what people need to see, details. It's until you see it like that and you realize what a cluster, it is to try to come up with the funds to do what needs to be done. The two things that just jumped out at me, first and foremost, the amount of nonprofits that we have in the city and how the residents have to pick up the in-between. That's the only thing about the special assessments that I like, is that everybody has to pay. And it makes it a little bit more fair. I absolutely think it's criminal that you charge interest, because I was part of the Berry project. I would have loved for the Berry project to continue if we could have continued negotiations on finding a way to make it happen. But things went through so fast, actually it went pretty slow when we were trying to get all the petitions pulled together. But we didn't vote to not have the road done. We voted to, let's figure out a way so that people aren't so stressed out on trying to come up with this money. And the other thing is, when Kim was talking about all the different little things where we could do another millage. Oh my gosh, please, another millage, really? We've already had 4, and it may be only $16 here and $58 there, but when I get my tax bill, it isn't $58. It's massive. And every year, it chokes me. And so, if it chokes me, and I can go and donate blood to pay my taxes, there are people that can't. So that little $15 here and $68 there adds up really, really quick for every millage that you add. I don't know what the answer is. I don't envy you guys on that board at all. I wouldn't want your job for anything. but we have got to find a way to make this work. And I agree with the fact that, and it's not this board that allowed these roads to get to this condition. It was 10 years ago, it was 20 years ago, and it just kept getting worse and getting kicked down the road. We have to find a better way, and the citizens now can understand, but I think we need to do something about the fact that the majority, or more than half of our community is non-taxed. That has to change, because the citizens, the regular citizens cannot afford to carry the city on their own. So that would be my suggestion. Good luck with that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Eric Lincoln, I live at 74 South Broad in Ward 4. The way that all this has been posed is as though, as though we're going to continue this ads and that we need to continue this ads in order to make all this square. I think the reality though is that the council has a choice before it, and that choice is either to continue to push the ads at the rate that they've been at and have every street respond the way that Berry Street has responded, or to come to some kind of a compromise where you say, okay, we're going to negotiate with the residents, we're going to, maybe we will establish SADs, but we'll establish SADs at some lower rate than $5,000 per household. Or certainly, I live on South Street, and I will happily organize my neighbors, have already started organizing my neighbors against the SADs. We have about half the signatures we need in order to shut it down the same way that the Berry Road project got shut down. So I think you really just have to figure out, are you willing to accept something less than what you've been taking? Or are you just going to push us all to just close this down? Because we will absolutely do that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Everett Hennis, 66 East South Street, Ward 4, longtime resident, first-time city council visitor. It's been really interesting, just as a first-time sitting through one of these meetings. A lot of information was presented. I'm not a great math person, but looking at the special assessments of $300,000, $3.9 million of need, I don't know that we needed as much information as we did to finally get to the point where we could speak our mind. It does seem like such a small amount that is already looking like is being built into other things that are coming into the marijuana tax and things like that, has been spoken before. Echoing previous speakers with regard to property values and those sorts of things, it just strikes me as a resident as odd that all the time that I spend here paying taxes, that all of a sudden I get hit with a giant assessment or tax. And I think it was in this last election cycle, somebody was up for election and their defense was, well, I had to pay it, so everybody should have to pay it. I don't think that's right, I don't think that's fair. I think the city council is hard of the job as it is, and the staff should find other funding mechanisms, which is good to hear that those things are being explored. I just encourage you to continue to explore them aggressively so that we can bring the special assessments to an end and stop burdening the citizens of the city.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jonah Apel. I live in Ward 4 and also am on South Street. I think I'd just like to join my voice in the rest of the opposition that's already been said tonight against the continued special assessments for the residential areas in particular. I'll keep it short, but I just want to talk a little bit more about the experience of other residents on South Street. I think as Mr. Fortendall said, we're gonna, I think South Street will be able to successfully protest the special assessments. And so again, you have the choice of, well, are we gonna find some other way to do this? Is there gonna be some kind of compromise? Or, or are we just gonna continue to leave streets in disrepair? I think, again, I'd just like to reiterate the points about how it really speaks to the incompetence of a lot of the local administration that's been going on from council, from city management, that we haven't been able to provide local goods and services from using the funds that are available that people have been paying every single year. I mean, property taxes are a kind of special assessment. every single year, we all pay several $1,000s in taxes. And the main obvious purpose of local government, just the most recognizable thing, is maintaining the roads. It's like the most obvious basic thing that a competent city government will take care of. And it's just apparent that the city has failed to do that utterly. And so I think that should lead to a lot of reflection there. And I think that the current use of special assessments is just not sustainable. You're going to continue to find that I think other streets in addition to South Street are going to continue to protest these measures. So thank you.
Thank you.
Madness in Ward 3 on Reading Ave, which I see is 2027 Special Assessment District potentially. I guess I want to start by maybe taking a more moderate position, although I'm definitely anti-SADS. It's obvious that this problem with our roads did not begin with this city administration, definitely not this council, who's only been here for years, most of you. But we have a difficult task ahead of us. And I see in myself, like most speakers before me, see SADS as an unacceptable way to tax the residents for that. So staff and council have a difficult, have the challenge of coming up with a way to fund these things. And I want to answer Mr. Mackey and Mr. Stugel, who said no one wants to pay for the roads. At least myself, I recognize that unless we're going to sit around and wait for the state to bail us out, we probably need to put up more money in some way as residents, because, like I said, you can't just sit around and wait and hope that the state will pave our roads for us. Nonetheless, as someone in the potential 2027 district, I've already not really started the petition, but at least printed it out and intend to go door to door on Reading Avenue. It's interesting what Berry Street accomplished. It's obvious how easy it is just to walk up and down your street. When I ran for Ward 3 council, I walked most of my ward. Took a little while, and this would be a lot easier than that. So I intend to do the same thing, and I'm sure there's already a few people I know who will sign that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comment? Seeing none, I will close the podium, and I just want to thank the city staff for putting together the petition or the presentation tonight. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn? I have a motion by, yes.
Oh, yeah, I guess I'm seeing what Matt was saying earlier. Are we gonna answer, like I wrote down all the questions, are we gonna answer these at a later date? I thought that was kind of what we were here to, I don't know. I thought we were doing a Q&A type of thing.
No, I'm going by what the actual thing in the rules.
Okay, yeah, I looked at the agenda later, but okay. Yeah, I just have like 20 questions here. I guess we could do them at the next council, but everyone.
Mr. Mackey might have, I saw you writing down, I mean, maybe you want to, maybe you don't, I don't know, but it's 9 to 9.
As far as the questions go, I think we'd be happy to answer them. I wrote down questions, but I'm not sure if mine and Councilman Palladino's would necessarily match. So we can go from his questions, and if it's all over the council, I know we have a motion on the floor.
We got a motion on the floor. Any support? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a vote. So, to close the meeting.
Okay, Councilperson Bruns?
No.
Flynn?
No.
Morrissey?
No.
Palladino?
No.
Soha?
No.
Stuchel?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor Sessions?
No.
And Ben?
No.
No, thank you, we're going to answer questions.
I just apologize for not noticing that on the agenda first. I was just coming with that. I should have made that motion earlier, sorry about that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I don't wanna monopolize it though, but if my list is not inclusive, please feel free. Let's see, first thing I wrote down was, is there a Pacer score pre-2010?
It was in the presentation.
Do we know how we got here, when this started? I mean, from everything I hear from people who've been here, it started in the 50s and 60s.
So my understanding is the Pacer rating has been around for a while. I don't know the exact start date for the city, but it wasn't, every street, every 2 years. So they would do half the streets, or maybe they only did half the major streets and not the local streets. But they weren't doing the whole system every couple of years. So the 2001 is the first year that the entire system was done. And then it was 2023, and then it was just done in 2025. Prior to that, there wasn't comprehensive data for the entire system.
Okay.
So according to Jason Councilman, we have used this around early 2000s Pacer scale, and it was only primarily for the majors because they are required to be done every 2 years.
Okay, maybe if that's not too much archival research, or if it's available somewhere, might be good to bring forward. Next thing I wrote down was the infrared filling / bonding. I think that might be a question for engineering or DPS.
I don't know that, I'll let you go ahead and answer it, but questions like that, I don't think necessarily get to our ultimate decision that we're going to be facing here. I mean, we could, a question could be asked if we're using the right gravel, or these type things. I'm gonna let them answer, but.
We can save those for a later date. I mean, they're ultimately related to the question of what's the most efficient way to do this, but if we want to just focus on the question before us, I'm fine with that too.
I can answer just a second.
Yeah.
So infrared, I'm not familiar with it. Generally, it's just bonded autonomous between layers. Infrared's only used for really cold mass or old mass bonding together. I'm not familiar with it. I don't need Rob using the comments.
Yeah, I haven't used that personally. There's lots of different options out there, and sometimes as you increase technology, you increase cost. So like a micro seal gives you a little bit better finish, but it's almost double the cost of chip seal. So as you get into playing around with all your different options, it's something that can be looked into. I don't believe infrared is common practice in this area that we have. At least, no matter if you're on county or popular out there. Most of the stuff that I've seen where they use heat to manipulate is usually cold patch, and cold patch is a different beast than hot mix asphalt. And cold patch in theory always moves, so you kind of got to do a little bit more with it to keep the good surface.
And I guess to answer a little bit more directly, we're not opposed to looking at different technologies or methodologies, but just like Rob, our current engineer, and Kristen, they're familiar with what typically works in an area, and we utilize what we know will work, so we're not redoing it. Much like Mr. Vazekas had indicated about trying to make sure we do the underground before we do the road if we know we have a lot of issues. Because one thing we do not want as a staff is having to cut into a brand new road, if it's possible, because of how that was
The pensions, I think I can answer that. We have closed them all out. We don't have any open pensions, but we have legacy pensions we're paying down.
That is correct.
And the numbers have been published on that actually fairly recently.
That is part of the budget, so you can see how much is spent if you went to police and fire, their budgets and pensions. You can see how much is put towards those, and it's the $495,000.
Okay. The profit on the interest, it was set at 1% above the bond rate of the city. That's something maybe we could explore again. I wonder what you think about this, because it was set above 1% as an administrative cost, right? Not hopefully not for profit. But now we're doing the new admin fee, which wasn't in there before. Is that correct?
That was just the admin fee is not anything additional. It's just to give a true picture picture of the cost that goes into putting the projects together.
So that's not a new amount added on top, that's just saying this percentage?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, so that's at least the justification for it, it was for actually getting the bond, administering it.
Right, and to be clear, we don't necessarily use bonds. We are limited by statute of how much we can bond based on our valuation. We used a bond for Westwood because it was such a large project, and it included water, streets, and sewer, and each component of that actually had to bond their portion of that work. When you bond a project like that, it's spread out amongst the entire tax base. This is, just want to make this clear, I know people are against special assessment districts, but the one thing that was mentioned in there that's the fairest with special assessments is, let me use someone who has your road. Say Jacob. Jacob had his road done in one of the first special assessments. He got his road done and he's paying for that. And I'm just using you as an example, Councilman. But his road is done. When you do a millage or a bond, you have to spread that payment out primarily across the entire city. So Bob's helping to pay for that city portion. Brandon, all the residents are helping pay for that city portion. So the fair thing about special assessment is who benefits the most, the person with the road in front of their house, actually just has a little more skin in the game. Not that, I will say to everyone here, again, special assessments is just a tool, and we're cognizant of, the residents of the community and their financial situations. This is just, in our opinion, the fairest one of those tools in order to do this. And back to your original question about the interest rate, the charter says that you can do up to 6%. So we, in this last policy, we changed that to say prime plus 1.
Right.
So we reduced it from the 6% that was put in there for the earlier.
How many years was that bond?
Oh, here now.
How many years was that bond for on Westwood, do you know?
Karen, do you know that? Was it 25 or 30?
I can look that up, Dave. It'll just take a minute.
Okay, so we'll get to you in just a moment.
All set.
Thank you.
So if there isn't a bond, where does the money from the interest go?
The money from the interest, the money from the SADs, everything goes into our road fund, which is the 204 if you look at the budget. And that's where we put all our project monies. So anything associated, the interest on the Galloway Road, that will go into 204. Special assessments go into 204. The millage is going into 204. So it all goes into that one account, and then that's where the projects are paid out of, so we can track it.
Okay, so really the only money that doesn't go for that project directly is money that's collected years afterward, but it's put into the same fund.
That's correct. So the idea was that, that special assessment money, if we take it out over 10 years, it's still going into that one fund.
Okay, thank you.
Dave,
Yes.
the road part of the general obligation bond expires in 2031, so
No,
I think
no,
it was
that's not
sized to match the millage.
That, Karen,
Yeah.
the bonds that we took out to do Westwood expired in 2031. I don't think that's.
It's the 2022 general obligation bond.
Yeah, I suppose. You're saying it goes to 2031? We did it.
Yeah, that's
for
what's
9
in the audit. 2031 is the maturity.
I think we should check on that, because usually bonds don't go that short.
a 10-year bond if that's how long the millage went. Do you know when the millage expires, Kim?
2031.
Yeah, so we couldn't do the debt past the millage. We'd have no way to pay that debt back. So I think that was on purpose.
All right, well, I think we should double check that. I could be,
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but, I thought it was a longer bond than that.
Okay.
All set. Next one, and what do we do about nonprofits? Nothing. That's a federal and state matter. Lobby your federal and state legislatures to actually define what a nonprofit is and put some restrictions on that. It's essentially anything. I mean, they've gotten wildly out of control. Sorry, I shouldn't be arguing. I'm answering questions.
But
if you-
Councilman, I would say, in regards to that question, they do pay special assessments.
Yes.
So that was one of the factors in looking at special assessments. And I will say that some of our nonprofits have paid special assessments and continue to pay their special assessments because those roads have been done by their properties or on their properties.
Yeah, no, and I made the argument, I think at the time, that, well, then we should just use them in those areas. And there's of course some concern about how it's applied, but I think that's still something to look into. Okay, the marijuana tax, that was only 20%. So that, I don't think that was really a question there. Jonathan Michael answered that. So even if we don't get the marijuana tax, we're still getting 80% of this new funding. So I guess maybe we could confirm that that's the case.
The new funding is great. Again, it's only set up for 4 years, and whatever we get, we didn't have. So I don't want anyone to think that we're downplaying that.
No.
You know, it's like getting a grant every year. You know, and I think it was put out here recently that in the last week that we received another grant for $375,000 for industrial drive out in the industrial park. So 400,000, if it's 600,000, that just helps our cause. So
Right. That's a question for council, I think. Are we trying to replace the SAD funding, or are we saying even that is insufficient and we need more? I think that's the thing we need to answer first before we determine. Are we trying to replace that, or are we trying to supplement it? And that sort of determines our next source. Okay, but last thing I wrote down, the Berry Street, what is the official way to protest? Who is able to authorize the denial of the petitions? Who denied them for Berry Street? I think that was the crux of the question.
and that would have to be something we'd have to go back and historically look at. You know, because there were numerous times that was brought up, we'd have to go back and look at that particular process. I know ultimately it was the city attorney who said the petitions were good. They could just sign a piece of paper and say they were against it. That's not how originally staff had reviewed that, because they appealed it, or they petitioned against it before we even brought a project forward. So the question was, well, we didn't even have the project presented to council for them to object to. So I know that was kind of the initial question before we got to the city attorney, but he had indicated pretty much, you know, if they opposed it, they opposed it.
Did we end up taking the attorney's opinion and then ultimately the judgment of the council and putting that in writing in the policy somewhere, just so that that's fixed for future reference? I don't think we did, but
I don't believe so, Councilman.
I don't think council made any objections at that time, so maybe just formalizing that would be a good way for clarity in the future. The last thing was, oh, sorry.
I would agree, Councilman.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just make one
Yes,
comment on
please.
that? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't accept petitions as objections to the project, because obviously it's valid, it's in writing, it has their name, we can verify it, that's not the issue. The issue is if people are bringing in petitions before we've even created a file to track those objections, there's a very strong chance that they're not gonna get counted because we won't have the information when we need it.
Okay, so we can, so the start date doesn't have to be that 10-day window, or is it?
No.
But we can set some sort of start date.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. We should write that in, thank you, I appreciate that. I think the last thing I wrote down was just the bond question. Can we just, I mean, interest rates aren't very low right now, although that sounds like they're coming down, but is that a possibility, just a bond with a sinking fund? I guess the idea would be that you're hedging against, you're betting against inflation.
Bonds, as they were with Westwood, are a viable tool. Historically, we've done this out of pretty much cash, and that's how the city operated pre myself 10 years ago. If they didn't have the cash, they didn't do it, so they didn't look for grants and other things to kind of parlay like we have. But, so that being said, you know, if a project warrants a bond, or it's big enough to warrant a bond, we aren't against putting that together, but we just think that, you know, with the chunks that we're doing, we can manage that without bonds, because the city has been debt adverse, because that was the first bond in quite a while besides the sewer treatment plant. The sewer treatment plant was, I think, in 17 or 16 when I first got here, and that was because we were mandated by the state of Michigan to actually fix the sewer treatment plant. And that wasn't, we only received one bid for the work, and when I asked the state if we'd have more time, they said, no, you'll do it now. So, that bond is outstanding, and maybe that might be the one I'm thinking of, that's a 30-year, long story short, bonds are options, but we typically fund these out of cash flow.
Thank you, that's all I had.
Kim, can you say when you anticipate having these two districts drawn up, Oak and South? Do you have a?
Is whenever I'm directed to drama.
Okay, but I guess that's fair enough. Thank you, because, yeah, I feel like the clock is ticking. We're at the holidays and we're gonna be in January and then the building season.
Well,
Sorry.
I think, Councilman, I believe we're supposed to present this information the 5th, or the first meeting in January. Yeah, the first meeting in January is when we're supposed to present the plans and specs and cost.
I see, okay. So the map itself, the targeted
areas,
properties.
for those areas on
Okay.
south and.
That's good. And I don't know procedurally, this committee of the whole, and we're missing Councilman Wolfram, but the people did all show up tonight, and as I've said for weeks or months now, we need to negotiate this. So I'm going to move, whether it's binding or not, and whether it's legit or not, or whether it passes or not. I move that for 2026, the calendar year, we set the residential cap at $2,800, as my understanding from, I think Mr. Kuykendall, I don't know if Mr. Niffen made a number, and if I remember correctly, that's the Oak Street number. So I move that we set the cap for this coming season at $2,800 for the residential properties, and see what happens. Otherwise, I'm afraid, as Mr. Kuykendall said, we're gonna lose the season. So that's my motion.
Are we allowed to make a motion in a committee meeting like that, or should that be?
I know.
Should that be made next week during the council?
Maybe so. I don't know, the attorney's not here to babysit us, but.
Right.
No.
It's not in the. it's not
We do
in the
make
rules.
motions in committee meetings.
Well, it's not in the rule.
Yeah, we normally do.
So I guess I'm suggesting, I'm making that motion to refer it to the council. Is kind of how I'm thinking, but I don't know. So far it doesn't have a second, so.
I'm not sure how that works, so.
I think you could refer it to the full council, sure, recommend anything you want.
Is that a second?
Don't need it.
I think.
I'll second it, sure.
I was gonna say, I think you just do it. I don't think you need a motion.
Well, we voted in committee meetings before to send something to council with a recommendation.
I'm gonna get you guys a book on Robert's rules.
I guess, got a motion, a second, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I guess we'll do a roll call vote. City Clerk Price.
Could you define the motion again for clarity?
This is just my language winging it. For the calendar year 2026, this building season that's upon us, for Oak Street and South Street, whatever those districts end up being, the maximum residential cap will be set at $2,800 and expire at the end of that year.
Is the motion just to bring it to council, or you want to vote on it right now?
I think it's probably more prudent to send it to council.
You are council.
Committee of the whole.
You have quorum.
It's not on the agenda.
We're sending it with a recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just say I'm opposed to it. I'm not interested in making special assessments more comfortable. I don't think they're a good funding method, and I think we should get rid of them.
So you withdraw yourself?
No, I think we should still take a vote on it.
Roll call?
Roll call.
Okay. Councilperson Flynn.
No.
Worsty.
No.
Palladino.
No.
Soha.
No.
Stuchel.
No.
Mayor Sessions.
No.
Bentley.
Yes.
And Rhodes.
No.
Okay, we got, was it 7-1? Actually, it was 7, so, sorry.
Okay. Yes, Councilman Flynn.
Dave, can I ask you a question? In regards to when it ever gets here, $2 million from the college. I know Kim mentioned that on average, the special assessment districts we've had, it's roughly been $169,000, is that what you said, Kim? Yeah. So out of that $2 million that we're going to get, can we conceivably think of that as a little over maybe 10 or 11 special assessment districts over the next 10, 11 years at roughly $170,000 a year, that we wouldn't have to charge those neighborhoods? Or would that college money be in addition to special assessments levied against the property owners?
So that is up to council. We would, of course, recommend that it be in addition, and that's what we meant by everything and. But that truly is up to council, and that's what this council has to decide how we're going to forward and ultimately how we're fair to the residents.
Okay,
And as long as we can administer it, we're okay with that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Move to adjourn?
Okay, do I have a second? Okay, I got a motion by Councilman Bentley, supported by Councilman Morrissey. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, motion passes and the meeting is adjourned.